Okay, so they brought me from Canada, and they brought me here to bring a message that we're in danger. We are in trouble with the way our digital culture is moving onto the web, how more of our lives are being integrated into the matrix. And I'm going to show you why. This is a quote from another famous Canadian media philosopher named Marshall McLuhan. Art at its most significant is a distant and early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what is beginning to happen. And I think we can use this for design as well. It's very useful for that. When we look at historical graphic design, it's always a good telltale sign as far as political movements, as art movements, things like that. And so I'd like to look at how our web culture is going as maybe an indication of where we're going to go. And so I kind of want to focus on web design. And by web design, I kind of mean anything that is based on the web. This could be applications or things like that, or even apps that connect to the web, so your native apps. But let's focus on the web for the sake of this one. And lately I've been noticing that there is a trend with web design. It kind of looks like this. And so this might look familiar to some of you guys. It's a blurry picture in the back, kind of doesn't really say anything. We get like some sans serif text centered on the front, a logo in the top, and it kind of looks the same. And maybe if it doesn't look familiar, maybe now it does. So when we zoom out a little bit and we see how some of the biggest tech brands and startups, they sort of follow this same pattern over and over. In fact, if you took away the logos, you might not know which companies these are. And so it becomes difficult to differentiate between who these people are, what industries they're in. You might not know what they even do for most of these. So the problem is everything looks the same. And why is that a problem other than brand differentiation? Well, we're going to explore that a little bit today. I want to talk about, first of all, why everything kind of looks the same. And I think a lot of it has to do with pressure. We have never had so much pressure in business, so no connections tied to the web and how our business is done, the success of it. Everything seems to be able to be tied to a metric, right? We can add analytics to almost anything we can monitor our revenue, we can monitor how much traffic comes to our sites, and because websites are so much more integrated into business, it filters down. Where a website used to be maybe a budget of the marketing department, now it's a core part of a lot of businesses. And so this makes a lot of pressure on our content writers, our designers, our developers. And I'm going to talk about 3 areas where I think this is really changing things. And number 1 is metrics. And so I'm not against metrics and research and good data science on its own, but when you can purchase good data or you can actually have a scientific method behind it, it can actually be useful. But a lot of us don't have access to that, and instead we kind of rely on a lot of tools like Google Analytics or Mixpanel. There's 100 of these apps that kind of monitor all this stuff. And we use it as this gospel, right? We've used it to kind of think for ourselves instead of ourselves. And so, we might take a metric like time on site. If time on your site goes up, is that good? Or if it goes down, is it bad? We don't know what that means. And I mean, did the user get what they needed fast enough and got out of there? Or are they lost on the site? We don't really know. And so that's a lot of these things. Same with traffic. Traffic goes up, but is it the right audience, right? Are we selling more because of it, or is our messaging going out the right way? And so what tends to happen is you get marketing departments and CEOs pushing from the top down and trying to make decisions for us. And so it might be, we got to A/B test the copy on this button, and we might do that, but then we find that maybe one piece of text does better than the other, but it totally ignores the surrounding context of that button. Maybe the page hierarchy is all wrong. Maybe you're tricking someone into hitting the wrong thing because it's not what they wanted in the first place. And so we have to question our science just as much as we question the designs as well. Another thing that tends to happen is this copycat culture, and this comes from metrics as well sometimes, is that when we see success of another company, we tend to jump on board it. So Airbnb had a video presentation for their landing page, and so now everybody else has to do this to try and capture that same success. We get very binary with our UI pattern. So someone will make a hamburger menu to make a flyout, and they'll write an article, and it'll be, hey, this is a great way to lay out complex navigation on mobile. And then someone else will test it in their own site, and it'll have disastrous results. And so now nobody can use hamburger menus anymore. So we kind of like have this binary on-off switch that we tend to follow all the time. Like, we'll follow one thought leader for a long time and listen to what they say until something comes around that's totally opposite. And we'll just kind of repeat these same things without actually questioning what makes them work and what might work in the context of your own product. So I think that kind of happens from the top down too a lot of times. It's as we get more integrated into the larger business functions, it becomes more risky to try new things and to iterate. And also, as we copy and copy and copy, those patterns tend to get less effective a lot of time, especially if it is a marketing thing. So we want to see why that is and how come. And this is another thing. And this is probably the most important part, right? The web is an information medium, right? It functions almost exclusively on text, but also now video and audio, and all those things are content, right? It's not just text. But the large amount of it, there's so much of it now that is just designed to sell, right? It's to sell products and to sell services, and so little of it is for actual entertainment or information. And so I think that's sad personally, because it's very hard now to find what you really want out of the web. Instead, you might be walking into a store and you get an alert from something and it tells you should buy shoes, and that's handy on one hand, but on the other, do we really need more consumption in our world? So it gets to the point where we have to kind of sit back and question what it is we are writing and why it is. It's getting so bad now that we'll have entire pages full of text trying to persuade you to purchase something, and then before you even get it, you get one of these, right? The email pop-up. It's like, to me, I see this as like you go on a first date, and before you've gotten the appetizer, your partner asks you to marry you, right? They're asking you for content or for contact information right off the bat. And you got to ask, like, in a lot of these companies, what are they actually going to deliver to you in return for that contact information? I mean, we got McDonald's. I hope none of you guys are on this email list, but if you are, don't give yourselves away, but we can talk after. And I mean, I guess I like Filet-O-Fish, but, you know. So we've kind of gotten into this bad habit, I think, where we forget who we are as individuals on the web, and whether it's browsing on our phone and we hit this thing and we can't figure out how to do it, we make these things to encourage signups for our products, and so we can be marketed to. But the fact is, most of us don't necessarily want that from everybody all the time. And there's got to be better ways, right? There's got to be a better way to get the attention that that stuff deserves when it's worthy. And I think this is what it really comes down to a lot of the times, is as an industry in general, in the design and tech industries, is that we really don't care about content. We only care about what it can do for us. And that's why we don't have as much intelligent conversation coming up to the top. We get a lot of listicles and we get a lot of clickbait headlines and things like that because it's designed to do one thing. It's to sell ads or get your name on a mailing list or collect data for more and more targeting of some kind. And that kind of hurts my heart a little bit because I'm very passionate about the web and what it can do as an intellectual medium. And so, as designers, we have all these pressures pushing down on us, right? We have the metrics we have to follow. We have these standards that kind of just repeat themselves over and over again, and we have this terrible copy that we just plug into the pieces that we create, and so we kind of end up just kind of going through the motions, like. Business has accelerated to the point where I don't think we've ever been ready for that kind of pressure and intensity as designers. And so now, with the sort of homogeneity, with the sameness of a lot of these pieces, we've actually sort of designed ourselves into this corner where everything is quite predictable to make. You can just visualize all these patterns. It's like mailing list pop up, and then you land on a home screen with a big picture with an image on top, and you go through the motions of it. And now we have machines here, and they are ready to take over. And the first one I want to talk about is Squarespace. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but Squarespace is a very popular website builder. And I actually really like Squarespace. I think it's a good tool. It gives small businesses especially a great opportunity to make a beautiful site for very little cost. I'm glad that my neighborhood taco restaurant can have a Squarespace site so he can put money into making awesome tacos. Like, that's great. Anytime we can give good design access to just normal people is awesome in my books. But there's a little bit of there's a consequence to this. These are Squarespace's templates. And if we think about what Squarespace is, its entire business model is built on the fact that you could put literally any content in any of those boxes, and you could put any image can go in the back, any text can go in the front, and that's by design. And that's great, but we just sort of keep getting more of this same thing. In fact, they look a lot like those images that I talked about at the beginning. And I just want to ask, what does that say about the way that we design when these types of things are really no different than those ones? And so this goes back into our individual kind of blogging. How many people are familiar with Medium? Great. So think of it as like Twitter for blogging, I guess. You can sign up, you can just start writing, you can write long form articles, and it's really great. It's great for being able to push out content and really awesome posts. And there's a lot of great writing happening on Medium right now. But even that, there's a little bit of a problem too, because as we get more and more of our good writing onto this service for its distribution, it gets shared really well. In the end, we're kind of pushing Medium's brand, not our own. And by consolidating all this information into one platform, I worry one day what that means in the long run. If all of our good ideas are hosted and presented in the same way with the same typography, the same images, and things like that. And so, by the way, I got to apologize for this other Canadian, Justin Bieber. But this is what they look like. And it's good, it's clean, it's nice, but it's kind of like, okay, we'll always have the same sort of reference. And so it's growing even beyond that. So we've got small businesses and we've got individuals publishing on Medium, but now all the big guys, Apple, Google, Facebook, and Medium are all making platforms for mainstream publishers now and inviting them onto their services so they no longer have to publish on their own. The advertising industry is in real trouble right now. And so with these guys, they kind of offer a lot of things for our publications, right? They offer speed, reach, tracking, convenience, conversions, profit, and they don't have to deal with ad networks anymore. And so that's kind of interesting. It's good. It consolidates all these news sources and all these sort of pieces of content into a few areas. But that scares me too in a lot of ways, right? Like you have a few of these Silicon Valley companies that are sucking up all of our resources, right? All our information resources, and in an effort to capture all the eyes on the internet, right? Facebook wants you to think that Facebook is the internet when you're on there, and Google, frankly, kind of already has, right? We don't when a website isn't on a Google search, it's like it doesn't exist to a lot of us. And so, what happens when you do go to Facebook to read the New York Times, or to read your local news, to read Medium posts, things like that. But Facebook chooses what to show you. It has its own filters, and we have no idea how their algorithms work. We have no access to the data that they give us, and it's based on the things that we like and the people that we connect to. And so I have a lot of fear, because information is power, and as we move further into the information age, we're giving up a lot of our power to these big companies, these big Silicon Valley companies they're in California. They have no nuance for other cultures around the world, right? By necessity, they have to have a generic sort of look and feel. So it appeals to everybody, it just works. And then we all become kind of the same. We read the same things and we understand how this is, and sometimes it's from a cat. And I'm sorry, this is so depressing to sound right here. But I'm not gonna let you guys go home on this pessimistic note, because I think there's hope. There's a great hope, in fact. The number one is that information wants to be distributed. This is great. It is way harder to contain information than to let it go. If we can learn anything from DRM in the music industry, by default, we try and lock things down when we feel like we need to control them or to make a profit on them. Yet, it's so much easier to circumvent that and easier to copy than to protect. And I think this is an important thing that also applies to writing. And second, we also have the tools. With all this information floating around, the distribution of information, the distribution of tools, we have a lot of power as individuals to create our own internet things, right? To have our own spaces. There's no reason that Medium has to be the single place where we post things in this central server. The only things that it has advantages on are having an easy-to-use interface and having the ability to share. But we can decentralize that. That doesn't have to be in a single place. But it's just, we'll get there too. And we're smart people. And collectively, I think we have the power to kind of pull that information power back. And the last and probably most important part is that humans are unpredictable, mushy bags of irrationality and emotion. And I think this is absolutely beautiful. Like, we are all different individuals. Like, we can track ourselves like crazy on Facebook and things like that. But the fact is, like, I look at my partner, Rachel. We are married and are business partners, and we've spent probably the last 6 years in the same room 23 hours a day, and I can't predict what the hell she's going to do in like 2 hours. So, but that's awesome. That's so great. And I think when you actually look at human beings, we have such power for diversity and different thoughts and opinions. And I don't think Facebook will ever truly be able to understand that. At least not if we don't let it, right? The more I think we do consume and allow all our consumption to happen through single sources like that, the more easier it is for them to do that. And so, I mean, one little trick that I like doing, by the way, is I'm on Facebook, just like I'm sure many of you are, but just try like not hitting the like button at all for a month, and it completely changes your feed. It's really interesting. Just a little tip. But this is what it comes down to. It's heart. It's having that heart. That feeling, our empathy for our fellow human beings, and kind of having a trust in our own, I don't know, our own cultural differences, and like, I don't know, just having the sort of foresight to start representing our own individuality and cultures on the web. I mean, Poland, for one, has such an insane history, and it's like, if you look at the art and design that has come out of it as a result of that, it's amazing, and it's totally different than anything you see elsewhere in the world, and I think it's important to be able to share that with the world. And so, we can do this, we just got to be better than the machines. And I just want to bring this quote up again, because if we look at the art, I think that's where we need to go a little bit. I think we can seed the art that tells the future to our current culture. And so one way that I get a lot of inspiration from magazines. And so I went to school to learn how to design magazines. I probably spent 30 hours a week reading magazines when I should have been reading school books. And so I just fell in love with them. They were from all kinds of interests, whether it was skateboarding or snowboarding or music. And it would just keep me in those interests for hours and hours on end. When I couldn't be snowboarding, I'd look at the books and read them, and I'd be so pumped on the typography and the expression involved in it. And I don't think there's any other medium that's been successfully able to combine art and copy into such an emotionally engaging piece. The good magazine, there's a lot of terrible magazines, but when it's good, it's really good. And so I want to kind of outline some differences with web and editorial. We've been down this road before when the web first came along. We tend to take whatever the past medium gives us and apply it to the new mediums, right? That's like another McLuhan thing, if you guys are familiar. But that was definitely true with the web. We started like making magazine CDs and things like that, but it never really, thankfully, took off because we don't have pages. There's all kinds of differences. But there are 3 things that I think we can learn from. And I'm going to talk about them and give us some practical ways we can be expressive on the web. And so the number 1 is our design systems. So typically, when we look at content management and our websites and the software we've used to build it over the years, it's really built for automation, repetition, consistency. And a lot of that is because of the speed of the web, right? We're cranking out blog posts, and it's really to sell more and do all this stuff. Because especially at the beginning, we created these platforms, and all of a sudden you needed writing so much more. And so you needed people like the marketing department, the secretary, whoever it was at the beginning, to just kind of like fill the boxes, right, and make it happen. And so as designers, we would tend to wireframe for things like the article page or the home page. And so the article would hold every single piece of content that goes through there, and that was it. In magazines, we kind of have a similar thing. You'll see this is kind of familiar if you've worked in any kind of UX or anything. Magazines also have wireframes, funny enough. But there's a few differences, and I think they're really key, right? We still have gray boxes there, but they're pretty flexible. And you'll notice there's variation between articles, right? Instead of looking at it, here's the article page, we might look at, like, what does an article with 4 images and 500 words of text roughly look like? And should that be laid out differently than a photo essay or maybe an interview? And so we start to accommodate for all these flexible pieces, and we can continue to grow those. And so on the web, we tended to train ourselves to stop at the system, right? We'll make a brand guide, we'll do a CMS, we'll get it all installed, but that's it. And then it's just production after that, content production. But in magazines, that's just sort of where the editorial starts. We fill up the content as much as possible, and then we spend the rest of that time, like, breaking out of it, using, like, breaking the borders and blowing it up, using different kinds of type and color to really bring out the message, augment that content in there. And, like, you just see, like, you can apply a lot of, I don't know, different, not only culturally in, like, a regional sense, but in, like, a hobbyist sense. Like, what do divers like? And I don't know. I find that, I love that. That's what got me hooked in this industry to begin with. And so we have to kind of understand the medium, right? So we're not, like I said, we're not dealing with pages and things like that. So the first step is prototyping for variation. So we have this little wireframing library we built called Livewires, and it allows us to do just that. So me and Rachel can go in and start trying out different content chunks and building components and testing them out in the browser. And so it just kind of allows us to build variation right from the day one of any project. And so that's one way to do it, but there's lots of other products out there. And I'll give you guys some links at the end of this. And that means that we have to build software that anticipates variation. So we use a CMS called Craft. We like it. There's lots of alternatives. But for our site, for example, we can art direct every single page on the site. We run a magazine on our site, which all the articles have their own touches of art direction as well. And so this will let us change the colors, the fonts, we'll have different content blocks, like blocks within an article, depending on if it's a quote or if there needs to be a call out with an image, things like that. And so we're getting better. We've got the software out there, but it just takes a little more exploration, I think. And it's not just for web. By the way, if you go to discover.typography.com, they've got lots of great examples of just playing with typography, and it can make such a difference and bring so much personality without a lot of heft. So we can do this on mobile apps as well. It doesn't have to be just the system fonts and the system designs. And it can still be a wonderful experience. So now I want to talk about this one, how we treat content. So when the web first started, we learned really quickly that you can't just design something and then throw content at it and hope everything works out. So we kind of adopted this methodology of content first, right? Make the content first, but really it was only so we knew how big to make the boxes in that content, because everything was sort of fixed width and you had to make like little boxes to put things in, and so we had to make sure the content was there, so then didn't make a difference, so we could accommodate it. But now everything's responsive, right? All our boxes are flexible. We have the capability, and as you saw with Squarespace, you can just have a shell and it doesn't really matter. So really, content first is no different than content last. On the magazines, however, it's content and design at the same time. And when we do this properly, we might ask, do we even need boxes to begin with? We start thinking outside the box, to pun it out. So while doing this, it means we can use expression to amplify this message. And I think we're at the point on the web where we can do this. Really, it's about using the machines to amplify our own humanity in a lot of ways, not let them just do the job for us. That's the whole message. Let's look at these. These are 2 magazine covers. I know most of our sites aren't magazine covers, but if you look at these, there's a couple important elements. Like, you can't take away the image on either of these without it changing the meaning. And you can't take away the words either. They depend on each other 100%. You know, that even that S falling, if it was just up there, it still wouldn't have the meaning. So every element serves a purpose. And that's something that we miss. So for designers out there and even content people, this isn't just limited to designers. When you read the text, think about how you can express information. So the ways we can do that in a practical way is using graphical media that works exclusively with the content. It pairs with it. This doesn't mean just like going and finding any random stock photo necessarily. This illustration, by the way, is an amazing way to support your content because it is so unusual on the web, but it's also very lightweight. So it's very performant. It's striking. It's amazing. Sometimes it takes a little more work, but I'm going to get to that. Also, interesting type. Type alone is another way we can use great graphics. If used sparingly, you can use it as almost like an illustration quite cheaply. And then size and style. Even if you're stuck with the same typefaces, we can play with things like this. And so the way I like to think about writing headlines and things like that is to lay it out as if you would say it. So this one I might say like, play with size and style. And it kind of like, you let the typography be the voice for you. And color. Just big blocks of color. It's so unusual to see this. But it can be so striking, especially when you compare it to like a wall of image-backed things. If you have a solid color with a striking font, that's impact, right? And all of these things, they're kind of different ways that we can still capture attention and draw people down into the content, into something that they might actually like. And it's not just forcing them into a simple popover. Which leads me to my last thing, and that's collaborating. And so in the web anyway, we tend to divide design up by job title. We have kind of UX design on the left and visual design on the right there. We've got, so in UX, they'll typically deal with layout, interaction, prototyping, research, and then they'll kick it over to the visual design guys to do like the typography, shape, and color. But usually by that time, the wireframe set, it's like paint by numbers. And so you're totally missing the opportunity to use typography and color to guide the eyes down the page and to do these sort of simple visual things where you don't need crazy features or code. You can do all of this with very simple HTML and CSS. And so if we look at the magazine industry, a lot of times the best ones they're structured a little bit different, where design is more of a bigger discipline, and there might be several designers of different specialties, and same with content. You have content people, which includes photographers and illustrators as well. They're all creating those pieces. And then research is there a lot of times, but it's also external, so they can have an objective view. So we're not kind of like pushing our own research agendas, which I think is interesting, and I'd like to see a little more in our industry. The key is that content and design, you'll notice, have a lot of overlap, right? They tend to, we have a lot of the same concerns when we're making website copy. You know, we're thinking of voice and tone. We're thinking about the impression that we want to make, and it just makes no sense to keep them separate. And so when we combine them, we have these two slightly different perspectives aiming towards the same goal. And there's some wonderful people that were at our workshop on Wednesday. You guys raise your hand for a sec. Talk to those guys about what they've done, because none of them are designers, yet they designed amazing stuff. They're content people, and it's just using that imagination and that combination of design and copy. And so as we go, instead of like having this waterfall method of sort of designing the wireframes and then kicking it off to visual design to do the next phase, in editorial design, you have like a team that will figure out the global system first, and then the same team will figure out the overall issue, and then you might have a few teams that are working on features and departments in each one, and it's kind of very similar to an agile process, oddly enough. You know, you think of a magazine, it comes out every month or every 2 weeks or even weekly, and it's kind of got that same thing where you get in this design cycle, and I think it's not that different than how we work on the web, but it's just sort of getting in the mindset and trying to create flow. And this is one thing that we're always taught as editorial designers is to bring flow into your pages. Every article should connect in some way to the next one and the next piece of content. It's not just random things put in there. And so this depends on, you know, destroying some institutional barriers. And if you're content people, that might mean going up to the designer and asking them, hey, how would you like to maybe rework this content? Or suggesting yourselves, I think that this would work well as a table. But designers have big heads too, so you kind of gotta like stroke their ego a little bit and be like, what do you think about this first? And then you can start that dialogue, and then it's no big deal. And another thing is, let's not let the metrics do our job. Let's use them for what they are and to inform us, but then we have to use our brains on top of that and think of creative ways to use those metrics. And then it's pushback, right? We have that pressure. And so a lot of it is just kind of like getting the gumption up there to talk to your boss and to talk to your departments and the scary designers and developers and content people, and maybe pushing back when you do see a bad idea. If someone tells you that we need to have an email pop-up on here, if that email pop-up goes past you, it's kind of up to you to stop it. And that can be tough, and maybe it's impossible, but if you try, that's important. And if you need help, we've got some scripts that'll help in this URL here. And then I think my final kind of big parting words on this is sometimes you have to bite the hand that feeds you. This is really great advice that we got from our friend Ray Sue, who also wrote in our magazine. But I think this is important sometimes. This goes against what we tend to think in our jobs and in our life and in our industries even. And sometimes you have to have a critical eye on what is coming down to you and kind of fight for that thing you believe in, right? And even if that means kind of being an angry dog about it. Yeah. So machines are here. It's time to revolt. I think we can do it, and I think we can make a web that's expressive and useful for humans, not just companies. So that's it. There's a whole bunch of links in that.
Okay, last chance to ask our speaker a question. Do you have any questions?
Hello. I've enjoyed it immensely, so thank you so much. It's been really amazing. But I have a question about, actually, do you think that some things should be similar? Because I agreed with a lot of the words that you said, and I can see this copycat culture. However, I think that sometimes when things are similar, it helps users in the experience, because you mentioned hamburger icon. When I open an application now on my phone, I understand this icon, and actually I wouldn't like apps to use something else for navigation, because this is something I'm comfortable with. I understand it. So yeah, what's your opinion on?
Yeah. So
how similar should we be, and in what aspects?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think about this a lot too, and the analogy that I always think of is if you think about the controls in your car, right, or several cars, we still have sort of same important functions and standards that are important to be there. The brakes should always be in an expected place, and same with the gas and the controls and all these things. At the same time, every single car, even between models, is slightly different ways of laying that out, and it can always be improved. And I think that's one of the key things that we get stuck on when we do just straight up copy things, is that we don't give it an opportunity to improve on that, right? And so sometimes just being different means iterating on it. It's not just necessarily just throwing the old thing out the window and trying something new. I mean, if we always followed those things, like Tesla cars wouldn't have like the crazy touch screen interface, right? And so sometimes we have to think of new ways to do things, as long as it is an improvement.
Hey Travis, fantastic presentation. You actually just answered the real question I have, so now I'm going to just make the goofy one.
Okay.
Your company is called Louder Than 10. Does it go up to 11?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, great presentation. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Thanks. My question is that could you please expand a bit more on the thing about metrics, because I'm not sure I got the idea right. So how does it how is it a bad thing, and how does it influence us to make bad design choices?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, sure. So about metrics, how metrics is a bad thing, and
it's not that metrics are a bad thing. I think it's just when we treat them as like gospel, right? It's when we don't question maybe how the metrics were generated in the first place, or we rely on them too much to make decisions. There's a lot of times when there's a lot of Google Analytics that are kind of meaningless on their own. And so I think the difference is, if you look at like Anna's presentation yesterday about going and hanging with drivers and learning how they live their life, that's a totally different set of research that's way more useful. You're seeing from day-to-day things that metrics on their own will never, ever be able to compete with. So it's just going above and beyond them, I think. Yeah.
Hey, Travis. My question is, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I love beautifully designed content that's unique and stands out, but it comes at a cost, and the cost is time and efficiency. And if I go to my boss and I say, hey, you asked me to create this content, and I create one single piece of content, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's unique, it uses type, uses design, but I didn't do my other 9 pieces of content because it took me a week to create a single piece of content. My boss, the hand that feeds me, is not going to be very happy about this. And so I would think we need to come up with some sort of compromise. And I was wondering what your take is on making everything beautiful, designed, optimized, and still keeping in mind that at the end of the day, we still need to deliver more than just one piece of content.
Yeah. Oh, I got so much to say on this too. It's you're right, and I think a big part of it is there is a systemic part to that where we do kind of have to care more about the production of content to an extent, and as companies bring more of their site in-house, we should be able to have a little more budget towards that stuff. Now that's a big ask, and it has to be kind of built in from the start, so you do have to have compromise. For us, sometimes it is ability. If we build something for a client, I always like to be able to give them a little bit of something to work with. And so for us, it might be using, in the CMS, we'll build like just options, just little things, right? Like 2 typeface options that they can switch between, and give them some guidelines for how they might do that, right? Like a sans serif and a serif, and be like, when you have this kind of post, use this and not that. And so you can start very incrementally and very economically, but it's really about getting in the mindset, just starting to think of like, how can we not just make this like a bunch of Word documents?
Okay, anyone else? Oh, lots of questions.
Hi, Travis. Thank you for the... Is that too loud? Thanks for the presentation. I noted that you said that you got into magazines when you were younger, through sports, etc. I did that very much myself, and probably like you probably have a backlog of magazines at home which you've kept. So that's non-disposable content. It's things which you've kept. Do you think digital content will ever become non-disposable?
Oh God, I hope so. I know that is one thing. That's one of the reasons I'm concerned about platforms like Medium specifically, right? It's a lot of content that they house, and if they do go away, if they don't make their valuation or shareholders don't like it when they do go, but that's a kind of a dangerous prospect for a big hunk of our written culture. So yeah, I hope so. I mean, when we control our own site, we maybe have a little better chance of keeping it online, but even then, I think the oldest site we have online is maybe 10 years old or 12 years old, so it's a big issue, and I think we got to figure out ways to preserve that. It's a lot of history that we could lose. Oh. I like that.
Hi, if I could jump in, not necessarily a question, but a comment on the previous question is how do we get our bosses to agree to 1% piece of great content instead of 10? Education, because I'm coming from the other side. Okay, I'm the CEO that asked for this content. People don't appreciate how much work it takes to deliver this and to do this. I looked at your presentation, and I know that it blew my presentation out of the water as far as graphics. Content was great, but the graphics was incredible. I know how much effort it took me to do that crappy presentation that I did in the morning. This is meant. So I know that this took far longer to put together than it did to actually present. Most of the people requesting this content don't know. They've never done it. So we need to find a way to educate these people to explain that, listen, this isn't a 5-minute job. This actually does take a long time, and that's why you've only got one piece of content instead of 10.
Yeah, it does take longer, but it doesn't have to. That system that I talked about a little earlier, it does mean having better content management and things like that. So we run a magazine on our site, and right now we have 4 people working on it, which seems like a lot, but that's 4 people working on each article, maybe about an hour each after the writer. So when you actually add that up and you're making pieces that are designed maybe for a little more longevity, like we try and only produce articles that we think are going to be relevant for several years, not things that are just disposable. I mean, it makes it worth it, right? Maybe it's 4 hours of manpower to go into something, but if you have the right system, you have a lot of freedom to do it. There is a little more work towards it, but it's actually not as bad as it seems if the right people and the right systems are in place.
Okay, let's agree that was the last question, okay? Because we're running out of time, and before I start this, thank you. Thank you, Travis. Thanks a lot. That was a beautiful talk. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you a lot.